Vice President Pence, it's great to be with you.
Thank you, Jack. It's an honor to be here
Well,
at the Kennedy Presidential Library, and thank you again for the honor bestowed on me and my family.
well, thank you for all that you and your family have done for our country and for your service. Last night, you received the Profile and Courage Award for your heroic stand on January 6th in defense of our Constitution. Since 4 years have passed since January 6th, I'm curious to know, what do you think the proper way for America to remember that day is? And, or should we try to forget it?
Well, January 6th was a tragic day. But as I said last night at the Profile and Courage Award, I believe the history will remember it as a triumph of freedom, because thanks to the courageous service of law enforcement, the Capitol was secured, and then members of Congress in both chambers, in both political parties, reconvened the very same day to complete our work under the Constitution of the United States. We were able to see to the peaceful transfer of power as the world watched following that riot that took place at the Capitol. And I remember saying then some words that I jotted down with the help of my family before we reconvened the Senate, that the world would witness again the resilience of our democracy. And my hope, and frankly, my prayer is that that's exactly how it's remembered.
Well, I certainly felt that way last night. Grateful not only that you made the decision that you made, but that so many others did as well. And you were so quick to give credit to law enforcement as the real heroes, as you said. But I think in some ways you undersold your own heroism in that moment. I was hoping you might shed some light on that day, in that moment. What did you knowingly risk, and did you have any idea what the future would hold?
Well, I have to tell you that even as things came to a head in the days before January 6th, I had a sense there would be political cost to me if I did my duty under the Constitution. But as my son, who's about your age and in the Marine Corps now, reminded me at the time, he said, "Dad, you took the same oath I took, and nothing else matters." He actually might have used more colorful language than that. But I never imagined the violence that unfolded that day. I was just resolved, and I think, as I said last night, by God's grace, I think I did my duty. But I have to tell you that that day in the Capitol, as we watched the violence unfolding, windows being broken, crowds surging, police officers being assaulted, I wasn't afraid, but I was angry. I was angry at what I saw. I remember thinking, not this, not here, not at the U.S. Capitol, and not in America. I thought that the people that engaged in violence that day dishonored our party and dishonored our movement. That I will tell you, Jack, with great confidence, is filled with millions of Americans who would never have done anything like that, there or anywhere else. And so, for me, the emotions of that day were resolve, some anger, but to be honest with you, I just put that aside. I honestly didn't have time for it. I had determined that we were going to work the problem, and once the leadership of the Congress asked me to get involved, to begin to enlist support from the Pentagon, the Justice Department, and to get answers, we focused on the work at hand and completing our work that day.
Have you been at all surprised by how members of your party have reacted to January 6th as time has gone on?
Well, look, there are very strong feelings about that election. And I understand that to some extent. I mean, the COVID was a great hardship on all of the American people. There were half a dozen states that changed the rules of mail-in voting, particularly in the name of COVID that I think undermined public confidence in the outcome of the election. We brought more than 60 lawsuits challenging results of the election. Of course, there was never any evidence of the kind of widespread fraud that would have ever changed the outcome of the election. But I said at the time, going into January 6th, that I understood the anxiety that people felt going in. But at the end of the day, for me over the last 4 years, Jack, what's been most inspiring to me is the number of Americans from every political perspective who've stopped me in airports, come up to me in restaurants, just walked up to me on the street, and whether they agree with me or disagree with me on my politics, have expressed appreciation. I remember I was campaigning in 2022 in Kansas for our governor's candidate there, and a farmer walked up to me on the rope line, got a hat in his hand, and stuck his hand out to me, and he said, I want you to know I think the election was stolen. And I said, well, sir, I understand. I said, you have the right to your opinion. And then he said, but I know you did what you had to do. And I shook his hand and said, that's all I can ask, is that what's been so moving to me, and I tried to express that last night if people might have been looking in, how much Karen and I have both appreciated the way people have come up. And many conservatives and Republicans have come up and said, I'm a big Trump supporter, but I appreciate what you did. But just as many people said they're independents, and many Democrats that come up and very warmly say, I don't agree with anything you stand for, but appreciate what you did. It's very humbling to me, and it does give me evidence and confidence that the American people know that Constitution is the common ground on which we stand. And I think that your family and the Kennedy Presidential Library last night and the reception that we got really reinforced that to me, that all the differences that we have in our country, we all know that if we stand on the Constitution, we have the means to work through those as one country.
I certainly felt in the room last night when you were speaking, there was a weight to your words, and this audience and the JFK Library, people really were moved by it. And I think that your example has inspired other people to think that they might be able to, not everyone is put in the position that, or no one has ever been put in the position that you were put in on that day. But you did stand up to President Trump, and I think these days, in the second term at least, it can feel scary to some people to speak out against the president and the current administration for fear of retaliation. Do you have any advice or words of wisdom? Not that you oppose him on everything or even most things, but you have disagreed with him in public on a couple of issues, tariffs, Ukraine, but you're still sitting here, and so I'm wondering, does it get easier as you speak out, or does it get harder? And for someone who wants to express their voice, what's the best way to do that?
Well, first, I come from the standpoint of serving for 4.5 years alongside President Trump. And Jack, we had a very good working relationship. I surprise people sometimes by saying, in 4.5 years, we never had a crossword between us until the very end. And I'm proud of that record. I'm proud of a record that supported our military, stood with our allies, stood up to our enemies. We cut taxes, we appointed conservatives to our courts, all the things that I, as a conservative, have dedicated my life to. And along the way, I did learn that with one notable exception, my experience was that President Trump listens, and particularly when he senses that people are speaking on principle and not on politics. And I think he knows me well enough to know that I believe, like most Americans that I admire, he knows I'm driven by principle. You know, as I said last night, I'm a conservative, but I'm not in a bad mood about it. I've never tried to figure out what the most popular position is. I've just tried to search my heart, decide what, as a Christian, a conservative, an American, I'm all about, and stand for those things. And so I would encourage anyone to, you know, always be prepared to commend the administration and the president when he does things that we agree with. I'm very pleased about securing the border, strong stands in the Red Sea with the Houthis, frankly, restoring the recruitment pace at the military and getting our Pentagon refocused on its core mission are all very welcome. But when it comes to the wavering support for Ukraine, when it comes to broad-based tariffs against friend and foe alike, we have spoken out. And I don't talk to the president as much as I used to, but I have every reason to believe he still listens to me. And I think now more than ever, my hope is that we will see more Republicans and Democrats speak out in ways on principle for the betterment of the country, because I think these are very challenging times, not just at home in our economy, Jack, but I think the world is becoming more dangerous by the day, and it's important that as Americans we rally around the lessons of history, the things that we learned. I remember when I was running for president a couple of years ago, not so where you'd notice, but I mean, I ran 2023. And I even traveled to Ukraine because I thought having America be leader of the free world and stand up to Russian aggression is important for the free world, not just for Ukraine. That 100 years ago, in a war that your grandfather fought with enormous courage, we learned hard lessons about not taking the ambitions of authoritarian dictatorships seriously. And sometimes people would say, some of my critics would say, well, you're calling on the U.S. military support for Ukraine is going to get us into World War III. And I would often say, well, I think you probably need to study the years before World War II before you decide that, because I think it's just that important of a time. We can't, I don't think we can, any of us, forfeit the ability to speak out, speak into this moment, because the destiny of the country and the destiny of freedom, I think, is tied up in decisions we're making today.
Couldn't agree more. President Kennedy represents an American legacy, but also a global legacy, and stands for the idea that America is a shining city upon a hill. And I wonder what confidence we can give the rest of the world these days that we still understand our mission and our role in the world, and that we're still prepared to defend our allies and freedom.
Well, I never want to pass over a chance to say what your grandfather's meant to me in my life. I shared with you last night privately that I actually started in politics as a Democrat, inspired by President John F. Kennedy, and to no less extent, your uncle Bobby Kennedy. These were remarkable men whose eloquence and idealism fired my imagination in my youth, and they still inspire me. I think that Bobby Kennedy's speech in Indianapolis, Indiana, on the day that Martin Luther King Jr. was struck down, will echo into history alongside some of the greatest speeches in our history. But I will tell you that I do think that your grandfather, from his time as a PT boat captain to going forward in the Cuban Missile Crisis, he represented and evinced an idealism, a confidence about America, but also a very seriousness about the threat that America and freedom faced around the world. I think that was echoed by subsequent presidents. I think President Reagan articulated the same kind of confidence in the American people and seriousness about confronting global communism. And another one of the Profile in Courage honorees, President George Herbert Walker Bush, oversaw the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union. But the threats are just as real today. Authoritarian regimes are on the move, whether it be in Russia or China or North Korea or Iran. And I think now more than ever we ought to be turning back to the wisdom of people that have gone before. But also, Jack, I would say to their confidence in the American people. That's what, look, there's political leadership comes and goes, but it's the American people that I am convinced know what our place in the world is and will, in the end, will demand that our leaders step up and fulfill that role.
Last night you spoke about your faith in America and that the future is bright. Mm-hmm. President Kennedy was the first Catholic elected president, and his faith was considered a hazardous risk to his campaign. What role should faith play in politics? I know that your faith may have guided you in January 6th or in many other decisions. How has your faith played a role, and how should faith play a role in our politics?
Well, faith has ever played a role since the founding of this nation. And you think of the very idea that our nation was founded on the principle that we believe we were endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And but at the very same time, we're also a nation that is respected, not just the freedom of religion, but the freedom of conscience for people to believe whatever they want to believe or believe nothing at all. And it's been that freedom that in which faith in all of its various expressions has flourished in this country. For me, the role of faith in politics, I hope people that come into public life will bring your values. I tend to think elections are not about telling people what they want to hear. It's about telling people what you're prepared to do and your motivations for doing it. I mean, some of my deepest convictions come from my strongly held beliefs. My conviction about life or about limited government are very much informed by a biblical worldview. But I think in fairness, what you do is you tell people who you are, you tell people what you believe, and then the other part of that equation is if you ever have the chance to serve, do what you said you were going to do. When I was in Congress those 12 years, where I also know your grandfather also served briefly, I would have new members of Congress come up to me. Maybe they'd seen me on C-SPAN or on television, and they'd say, "What advice do you have?" And I'd say, "Vote right and go home for dinner." I said, just do what you told people you were going to do if you ever got here. It took me 12 years to get to Congress. And so by the time I got there, with the wonderful support of my wife and our family, I just purposed to be who I was. And my faith was a part of that. But I hope the greatest influence of my faith has been the way I've tried to deal with people. Early in my career, when I was about your age, I started in politics, got caught up in a lot of negative personal attacks, not only lost a few elections, but I lost a lot of self-respect. By the time the opportunity came around 10 years later, Jack, I had just purposed to try and live out my faith, to treat others the way I want to be treated. And I think that democracy depends on heavy doses of civility. And that I hope, whatever people's faith tradition, that more than anything else, the way that faith influences them is the way they respect others and show kindness to others. Because that ultimately is the foundation for how we move our nation forward.
Well, I have just two more questions, slightly different tone. Why is Indiana the best state in America, and what is your favorite snack?
Well, I think my favorite snack would be popcorn, because we probably grow more popcorn in Indiana than anywhere else in the country. Why is Indiana the greatest state in the Union? With all due respect to all the other 49, it's just the people. Hoosiers are the kindest, most gracious, hardworking people in the world. I just had a friend at the dinner last night stop me and say that he visited Indiana not long ago, and on business, and he was overwhelmed by the goodness of the people there. You know, it's generations of people that came up on the farm carry those values of faith and family and neighborliness, and that's why when the election settled out in 2021, Jack, the first decision Karen and I made was we're moving home. And we bought 5 acres and a pond and got a riding mower and a pickup truck, and you know, whatever the good Lord has for us in the future, we figured we could see it better from Indiana.
That's a good enough answer for me, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your courage and leadership.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, sir.